Imagine the sound of your heart beating, now speed it up, add a bit of 90s bass and let a deep, gravelly voice tell you that it's in the game. If you grew up with a PlayStation, that sound wasn't just a logo, it was a promise. It meant that even if the game ended up being a bit rubbish, the menus were going to look slick, the music was going to be loud, and the production values were going to be higher than anything else on your shelf. EA Sports didn't just make games, they made events. And in the mid-90s, NBA Live was the king of the court. Back then, sports games were the cool kids of the library. While some of us were obsessed with Orange Bandicoots or Dragons, there was a huge group of people who only bought the console for one reason, to play their favourite teams. NBA Live captured a very specific energy. It was the era of baggy jerseys, cornrows, and the height of the Chicago Bulls' dominance. When you popped that disc in, you weren't just playing basketball, you were taking part in the culture. But looking at these games now, there's a strange corporate coldness to them. They don't have the handcrafted feel of a Crash or a Metal Gear. They feel like products, efficient, shiny, and designed to be replaced in exactly 12 months. We're about to dive into 8 years of rosters, dunks, and menu music that define the EA Sports era. It's not going to be a nostalgic trip through the fantasy worlds. It's going to be a fast-paced march through the games that turned the PlayStation into a permanent fixture in the living rooms across the world. Grab your jersey, we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Turn to sender, because we're back with pupil-popping moves and cranium-thumping hits. Every growling foot an international tinderbox, demolishing asphalt with heavily decaled wrecking balls, and starring in 24-hour fist festivals. Old school, new school, either way, we'll school ya. Hitting so hard, you'll yodel through your nose. We're mud-mucking dirt devils, giants charging with thundersticks, the guys who speak in national championship outbursts, and answer to the name of Mr. Boom Boom Bang Bang Bye Bye. You still want in this house, remember one thing: no talk, no walk, no way. Sincerely, the cyber athletes of EA Sports.
Welcome to the PSX Index. I'm Parascreen, and this is the show where I play and document all 1,278 PS1 games released across North America. Today's episode is Index Entry 57, but we aren't stopping there. We're also hitting 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63 and 64. That's right, we are clearing the entire court by covering the complete history of NBA Live on the PlayStation 1 in a single sweep. I've done this before. Back in Index Entry 19, I tackled the FIFA series. It was a massive, slightly exhausting march through 11 games that taught me a very important lesson. Sports games on the PS1 are the infrastructure of the console. They are the games that sold millions, stayed in the bargain bins for decades, and ensured the PlayStation wasn't just a toy for kids, but a machine for everyone. By grouping these 8 NBA Live titles together, I'm not just being efficient, I'm trying to show you the big picture. When you play these games one by one, you see something you can't see when you play them years apart. You see the exact moment the technology peaks, the moment the developers run out of ideas, and the moment the series starts to just tread water until the next console comes out. It's a different kind of challenge for the Index. It's less about discovering a hidden gem and more about documenting a legacy. This is 8 years of basketball history compressed into one episode. By the time we're done, we'll have put a serious dent in that final number of 1278. We've got a lot of rosters to check and a lot of 32-bit dunks to watch. Let's get to work.
Scottie Pippen.
The NBA Live series is the perfect example of how EA Sports changed the way we buy games. Before the mid-90s, a sequel usually came out when it was ready, but with the PlayStation, EA perfected the yearly plan. They realised they didn't need to reinvent the wheel every time, they just needed to update the rosters, tweak the menus, and release it in time for the new season. This model turned gaming into a routine. It made the PS1 a permanent part of the furniture because there was always a new version of the sport you were already watching on TV. We see this everywhere now. Whether it's Call of Duty or modern Madden games, the yearly must-buy cycle was centred right here on the original PlayStation. For some people, this is where gaming lost its soul and became a bit too corporate. But for the Index, it's a massive part of the story. You can't talk about the history of the console without acknowledging the games that people actually bought in droves. Even if you aren't a sports fan, which I'm certainly not, you have to respect the hustle. EA managed to make maintenance feel like an upgrade for nearly a decade. The problem with playing 8 of these back to back is that the illusion of change starts to fall apart. When you space them out by 12 months, a new font or a slightly faster player speed feels like a big deal. When you play them in a single afternoon, you realise just how much of the new game is actually the old game with a fresh coat of paint. It's a fascinating look at design discipline, or if you're being clinical, design laziness. Either way, it's the blueprint that the entire industry still follows today. The first step of this journey starts with NBA Live 96, and it's a very strange place to begin. Even though it's running on a 32-bit powerhouse, this game still feels like a ghost from the Mega Drive or the Super Nintendo. It's what we call a transitional game. The players aren't 3D models yet, they are 2D sprites, flat, pixelated images that flip around as they run across the court. It feels a bit like watching a game of paper dolls playing basketball. However, EA did something clever to make it feel next-gen. They used what they called a virtual stadium. While the players were flat, the court itself was a 3D environment. You could rotate the camera, zoom in, and see the depth of the arena. For a kid in 1996, this was a wow factor. It was the first time a basketball didn't feel like a static screen, it felt like a broadcast. You were looking at the future through the lens of the past. Playing Live 96 today for the Index is a reminder of how clunky those early days were. The controls are heavy, the dunks feel like they're missing a few frames of animation, and the sprite flipping can actually make you feel dizzy if you look at it for too long. But you can see the ambition. EA was testing the water, trying to figure how to take a successful 16-bit formula and make it work on a disc. It's not the best game in the series, but it's the most important one because it laid the foundation. It was a bridge between the arcade-style games of the early 90s and the simulation era that was about to take over. This is where things got serious. By the time NBA Live 97 and 98 rolled around, the flat 2D sprites were binned. EA moved to the full 3D player models, and while it was a massive technical jump, it led to some of the funniest looking athletes in gaming history. These were the polygon years. The players looked like they were made of wooden blocks and glued together, with giant square shoulders and what I like to call T-Rex arms. Their elbows didn't really bend, they just sort of folded. Despite the blocky looks, the gameplay changed forever. Having 3D models meant the camera could finally move freely. We got multiple angles, swooping transitions, and close-ups that made the game look like a real TNT broadcast. In Live 98, they even added Total Control, which let you choose your dunks and layups. It felt like we were finally getting a sim instead of an arcade game. You had to actually think about the shot clock and play some defense, rather than just running in circles. Looking at it now, the faces are the best part. EA tried to paste actual photos of the players onto these blocky heads. It was a bold move, but technology wasn't quite there. Most players ended up looking like they were wearing a mask of their own face that didn't quite fit. Still, for the time, seeing a recognisable version of Shaq or Penny Hardaway on your TV was mind-blowing. It was the era where realism was the goal, even if that realism looked like a collection of moving boxes. It was a messy experimental phase, but it gave the series the 3D identity it would carry for the rest of the decade.
Side. No good. Board made by Rodman. Kevin pump fake. Throws it down.
If you weren't there at the time, it's hard to explain how weird it was to play the definitive basketball game without the most famous person on the planet. Because licensing issues and Michael Jordan having his own separate deals, the greatest player of all time was missing from NBA Live. In his place was a generic character, usually called Player 99. He had the stats of a superstar and the number 23, but he had a generic face and a name that sounded like a serial number. This is where the Create a Player menu became the most important part of the game. I remember sitting there for what felt like hours, trying to manually build Jordan. You'd tweak the skin tone, give him a bald head, and try to find the sneakers that look most like Jordans. It was a shared experience for every kid in the 90s that played NBA. We all became amateur game designers just so we could have a proper Bulls vs Lakers matchup. It added a human touch to a very corporate product. The game was incomplete, and it was up to us to fix it. This Jordan hole is a legendary bit of gaming history. It showed that even a giant like EA couldn't always get what they wanted, but in a way, it made the community more active. We traded formula codes at school, telling each other exactly which height and weight settings would make Player 99 look the most realistic. Looking back at these entries for the index, seeing that empty spot on the Bulls roster is like seeing a missing tooth. It's a reminder of a time when the business side of gaming was still a bit messy and uncoordinated, leaving us to fill the blanks with our own imagination. By the time we hit NBA Live 99 and 2000s, the series had stopped trying to just be a basketball game and started trying to be a lifestyle. This was the peak of the PlayStation's cultural power. The games were drenched in the style of the late 90s. We're talking baggy jerseys that look like capes on the players, cornrows and soundtracks that were actually worth listening to. EA learned the hard hip-hop, and it worked. The game felt cool in a way that most other sports titles didn't. Technically, this era introduced face in a game. This was EA's attempt to scan real player faces with more detail. On a modern screen, they look like something out of a horror movie. Frozen staring eyes and skin that looked like it was made of wet clay. But back then, it was the height of technology. You could actually tell who the players were without looking at the jersey numbers. NBA Live 2000 even went a step further and finally got the legend himself, Michael Jordan, back into the game for a one-on-one mode. It felt like the series had finally completed its transformation into the true simulation. What stands out most about these two entries is the atmosphere. The presentation reached a point where if you squinted, it really did look like a TV broadcast. The commentary got smoother, the replays were more cinematic, and the flow of the game felt less like a struggle and more like a dance. For a lot of people, NBA Live 2000 is the best one on the system. It hit that perfect balance where the hardware was being pushed to its limit, but the gameplay hadn't yet become the repetitive grind of the later years. It was the moment the series had the most soul.
South with an easy lay-in.
As we move into NBA Live 2001, 2 and 3, the energy in the room starts to change. The PlayStation 2 has already launched, and you can feel the developers shifting their focus on the new shiny hardware. These final 3 entries on the original PS1 are the definition of maintenance mode. The graphics don't really improve because the console has nothing left to give. Every polygon is already working overtime, and every trick in the book has already been used. Playing these back to back for the index is a bit like Groundhog Day. The menus get a slightly different colour scheme, the music changes, and the rosters are updated to reflect the new trades, but the actual game on the core feels identical. This is the era of the roster update. If you were a kid still playing on the original PS1 while everyone else had moved on to the next generation, these games were a lifeline. They kept your console relevant for a few more years, even if you knew deep down that you were playing a relic. There's a quiet sadness to these sunset years. The innovation has stopped, and the wow factor is long gone. By NBA Live 2003, the game feels like it's bursting at the seams, the file sizes are huge, and the loading times feel like they're testing your patience. But as a documentarian, these games are vital. They show the long tail of the PlayStation's life. They prove that even when the next big thing arrives, the old guard doesn't just vanish. It stays behind, putting in the work, and making sure that those who couldn't afford the new console yet weren't left behind. It's not the most exciting part of the series, but it's a necessary chapter in the story of how the PS1 refused to quit.
Yeah, EA Sports! Come on! NBA Live, yeah.
8 years of basketball, 8 years of dunks, baggy shorts and playing 99. Walking through the entire NBA Live history on the PS1 is a strange experience. It's a journey that started with 2D sprites in Live 96 and ended with the sunset of the console in Live 2003. We've seen the series find its feet, become a cultural icon, and then slowly fade into the background as the PlayStation 2 took over. It wasn't always a romantic experience, but it was an honest look at what gaming was for millions of people in the 90s. For the PSX Index, this episode is a major victory. By bundling 8 games together, we haven't just saved time, we've captured a complete evolution. We've seen how EA Sports built that annual machine and still runs the industry today. While these games might not have the timeless charm of a mascot performer, they are the backbone of the PlayStation library. They are the reason the console became a global phenomenon. By finishing these 8 titles, the number on the ledger has taken a massive hit. We are moving faster now, clearing the administrative work so we can get back to the weird, the wonderful and the legendary titles that made the console a legend. We've checked the rosters, we've played the seasons, and now we're hanging the jerseys in the rafters. 64 games down, 1,214 games to go. Next time on the PSX Index, we are leaving the court behind for something much darker. We are moving to Index Entry 65. A game that trades the bright lights of the arena for the blood-stained rooftops of feudal Japan. It's time to see if we have what it takes to be a master of stealth. Tenchu Stealth Assassins is up next. From the roar of the crowds to the silence of the blade, the shadows are waiting. I'll see you on the next one.
EA Sports. It's in the game.